So when we talk about is a billion people, a billion new users going to enter Web3 through gaming, we already have established IPs that are on that level. And I think that one major IP stepping into Web3 immediately changes the game and the whole narrative in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I want to mirror what you said, Dylan, and I think you hit it nail on the head. You and I discussed this, a bit before the panel as well, and we bounced some ideas back and forth. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And we've had some really great examples of games come out of traditional game development businesses, but catered towards Web3 audiences this year. One, Eve Frontier, from our friends over at CCP Games, who, fundamentally understand the value of digital assets, because they've been doing it for 20 years, right? And they've run through Web2, an open marketplace between fiat to in-game currency conversion. But obviously the next example that I'm always really happy to talk about is from our friends at Nexon, who put out MapleStory Universe, MapleStory M, which launched out of Abu Dhabi this year. And in the short 2 weeks since it's been live, they've already onboarded over 2 million users, which to me is proof that there is heavy interest in gamers, looking at their digital assets that they earn from time, effort, and obviously from putting in the skill. They're looking at these digital assets a bit differently. And I think what matters, and this is where Dylan and I really agree, what matters most is that you build a product for the consumer first. You build a game because it's a game. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be an entertainment product. The systems all fit into the back end. I've never picked up a game in my life thinking to myself, wow, I can't believe how amazing the trading functionality is. No, I mean, you just right-click, trade, send some items through. What you really care about is that it works, right? What keeps you playing is the gameplay loop. It's the feedback of knowing that the time and effort I'm putting in is rewarding me with items that I can then now show off or potentially earn value from. And whereas for the longest time, gamers that would commit time, effort, and energy into building up their social profiles in video games didn't have a real life impact, we're now seeing that that's changed. We're now seeing that the time, effort, and energy you put into playing games can award you handsomely. And that's a direction I think that's not going to slow down. I think it's one blockbuster hit that'll change everything. With Epic, for them to be able to enter the global games marketplace scene, they needed to have Fortnite. Before Fortnite, nobody would have installed an Epic Games launcher. They wouldn't have any chance of competing with Steam, but it happened. And I think that same thing will happen in Web3, and it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I mean, but time is always of the essence, right? And before we go into the topic of incentivization, which I really want to spend a little bit more time on. So funny that you've brought up Nexon and a couple of kind of like Web2 studios that have kind of like embarked on this journey. One very, very big studio that was actually considering to bring a huge IP, which is Final Fantasy on-chain, right? I think this happened back like 4 or 5 years ago, and I think there was an attempt as well by Square Enix, but they failed, right? What are your thoughts on that? Like, today, are we going to see Tencent Games launch a Web3 game? Are we going to see Valve start pivoting? They just launched a new mobile, right?
Yeah.
To kind of like, with Dota kind of like falling off the cliff. They launched a new mobile. Why not make it a Web3 game? So that's a glaring question, right?
Valve, I love this question. And I like that you use Valve as the example specifically, because Valve's always had the sort of philosophy that there's no need to adopt technology for the sake of adopting technology, and there's no need to build sequels. I'm sure if you're a gamer, you guys know that Valve doesn't know how to count to 3. That's like a very common trope. But a big reason for that, if you really talk to the team and you figure it out, it's because if there's no reason for them to do it outside of just money, they won't do it, right? If there needs
they don't need money.
Right. I mean, for a private business that runs more than half of the world's sales in video games, definitely, I don't think they're strapped for cash. But I will say that when you see companies like Valve adopt the technology is when you know that that's the tilting point. But I don't think they'll be the catalyst. I don't think they'll be the first. And I know, when looking back and seeing the path a lot of different studios have taken to enter Web3. You mentioned Square Enix. Another good example is Ubisoft, who were very early in announcing that they were going to enter the NFT space. I think it was primarily users that pushed Square Enix and Ubisoft away from that. It was the end user that was more, like, why are you doing this? Is there going to be an upside for me as the player, or is the upside just going to be for you? There's a big, and something I tell my team quite often, especially when we put out marketing, is that gamers are a very tough bunch to try and please. They're very aware. They have their finger on the pulse, and they know when you're selling them BS, and they really are a tough crowd to market to. I think timing is important. You mentioned, the time is money, but I think getting the right project out, getting people excited about it, and then saying, oh, by the way, it's a Web3 project, will have a considerably bigger impact towards gamers than just saying, hey, this is the next big Web3 game. You know what I mean?
What about you? Yeah.
And building on that as well, I think Web3 gaming has a bit of a branding crisis. For quite a while, coming out of 2022, a lot of money being pumped into Web3 gaming after the heels of Axie Infinity. Shout out to the development teams here in Vietnam in bringing that one to market. But so many projects launched out of 2022 and the gaming narrative that just didn't deliver. And at the end of the day, gamers became anti-crypto. They became anti-Web3. As soon as you say, oh, we're integrating Web3 into this, they think of it as financialization first. And I think that one of the big things that has held back Web3 gaming is there hasn't been the meaningful, sustained integration. It has been used as a financialization first and not game first. And so we need good games that introduce a unique player experience, focus on the players, focus on the gamers, give them something unique, and then let everything else go from there. I think when we think about Web3 gaming, the ethos of Web3 isn't necessarily built on financialization. I mean, sure, decentralized finance, decentralized lending, wonderful use cases. But when I think about Web3, I think about decentralized coordination. I think about building communities, community development, interoperable IP.
Coordinated user-generated content.
Yeah. And so when we work with founders, at our previous one with WW Ventures, we had invested in 50 companies, Fnatic being one of them, and a few Web3 titles. We work with founders to think about community development. When you are a traditional company, you might have 5 people in your marketing department. But when you build effective community development programs, you enable your community to service and work towards building that product, building that ecosystem. So rather than having a 5-person centralized marketing team, you have a 50-person marketing team. And I think that games need to take a community-first, gamer-first approach, and then take the incentive side and focus on IP, focus on the experience, and then the rest will follow.
I think this problem, I really like what you said, Dylan. I think this problem isn't unique to Web3. It's sort of been a common trope that you've seen happen throughout the last decade in game development in general. We've seen more successful studios unfortunately fall for this trap where the end user, the player, stops becoming your main shareholder. It's the people owning the shares of your business that become your main shareholder. And you see more predatory monetization. You see a lot of bad faith business practices being put in place. When a game dev studio hires more psychologists than game developers, you know that we're moving in the wrong direction. And I think that's become a lot more common today, not just in gaming in general. And unfortunately, for a lot of the bigger players, they're not the right people to be able to share that message to audiences. And this is why you see a lot of indie studios put out games that reach massive fanfare. Huge success stories come out of businesses that you would have never expected. $1 billion plus in sales to companies that like Pocket Pair that put out Pal World. I mean, how are they beating Nintendo at their own game? When you see things like this, you start to understand that the consumers are sort of getting wise to this. They're seeing that the more the companies talk about how they're going to profit, the less they're talking about how much fun you're going to have. And carefully balancing that, I think, is what's going to make Web3 gaming a challenge, but definitely one that'll be surpassed.
I love the fact that you brought up consumer psychology engineering. That's something that has taken place through decades, not just only for gaming, but also for our daily use of products, whether it be this bottle of water, this phone, mic, right? So application does not necessarily need to take place across the board, right? But everyone's so driven right now by profits, right? And that's exactly what's being mirrored onto each and every one of us here as consumers as well. So that allows us to kind of like step into that topic of incentivization. Should there even be incentivization in the first place, right? because as you both have like rightfully pointed out, right? Everyone's going into Web3 gaming simply because of, can I make money?
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not shy to admit at my peak for Axie Infinity,
Yeah.
I was making like what, $3,000 a month.
That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah, who does that?
Yeah.
I've played Axie Infinity for like what, 4 months, and I was making $3K like dollars in a month, versus I've been playing Dota for 8 years.
You paid them $3,000 a month.
I pay them $3,000 a month, right? And I've never seen any ROI coming back other than the fact that I enjoy seeing the skin, my character dancing inside the game. So going back to bare basics, in Web3 gaming, is there even a need for incentivization?
I'll let you take this one first.
Yeah, so in Web3 gaming, is there a need for decentralization? Incentivization. I think that it gets into an interesting piece about what is your magnet? What kind of audience are you actually attracting? And how are they going to meaningfully participate? And it goes into sustainability. And when we look at short-term campaigns, if there's an anticipation of an airdrop, you're going to have a lot of players that are just going to farm what you're doing, but they have no connection to the competition, no connection to the gameplay. They're there to capitalize on a short-term opportunity. And then once that incentive program is done, there's no retention. And we've seen games in Web3 absolutely blow up. The numbers are there. I mean, Hamster Combat, right? I think 150 million monthly active users within 3 months of launch. So it shows that when account abstraction and the rails are available, people will come in. But within a few months of launch, I think 85% of the gamers that were participating in the ecosystem left because there was no more speculation. And so when we think about, should there be incentivization? I think the incentivization element is a privilege. It means that you've built a strong community that cares about the IP, that cares about the ecosystem itself. Like, why do these digital assets have value? Do they have value because they're going to be sold and traded on a marketplace and speculated on and the whole deal? Or is it there's a root mega fan somewhere that knows what that item is and knows what it cares about, and they care about the competition.
Right.
They log in and they see their friends and they talk to their friends in these spaces. Yep. When we look at younger individuals in particular, I think games serve as a unique third space. It's where people go to talk to their friends. It's a primary social channel. It's increasingly more than just a game. And so when we look at gaming being more than just a game, I think that incentivization is a byproduct, but it shouldn't be the core root, the foundation.
Yeah, you hit it nail on the head. I think there's some businesses out there that have really figured this out. There's some companies that understood the need for you having a dedicated player base of fans, people that are just passionate about what it is you're building, right? And you can't bring those people in through incentives. You have to get them in as core root fans. For IP, especially IP that stood the test of time, a good example we spoke about earlier was MapleStory. You don't need 100 million monthly active users. They've been able to keep that game alive with anywhere floating from 30 to 60,000 monthly active users, right? And I think, the incentives in place for the top players of MapleStory aren't the same sorts of incentives you see in Web3. Yep. And there's got to be a root, and you and I spoke about this with relation to other titles. There's got to be something that at its precipice attracts you to the game. And I'm somebody who's a big fan of MMORPGs. For years, I've dabbled in a bunch. But whenever there's a fresh World of Warcraft launch, whether it's a new expansion or a new patch, I'll jump in for a few weeks. So I'm that audience that they've captivated early on that keeps coming back. And games need to build fan bases like this. If you incentivize people by putting a carrot on a stick and waving a shiny little reward at the end of it, once they get that little reward, you're not building long-term stories, and you're not building that sort of social elements that makes games intrinsically successful.
So love how you brought that up. So you referenced games that brought a lot of nostalgia.
Right.
You referenced games that spent years building an IP, right? Like World of Warcraft was built since
the 90s, yeah.
Yeah,
Warcraft
1, 2, 3, and then World of Warcraft came out, right? So then it became something that everyone just kind of grew with. We grew with Blizzard, basically, right?
Yeah.
And then the other IP that Blizzard holds is Diablo.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Exactly the same, right? MapleStory, Nexon has kind of like blazed through the past 2 decades and kind of like remained very, very relevant. We have Ragnarok Online by Gravity. They too have milked nostalgia. Now, if there's any advice you could give...
Let's not forget Jagex.
Sorry?
With RuneScape. That's probably the biggest examples in the world,
How could we forget?
I can't forget RuneScape. I'll talk about financialization in games.
I think there's more people playing old school RuneScape than there ever were playing RuneScape 3.
Correct. So, but building on that, right, if there's ever any one advice that you would give to any budding new studios, right, they don't have the luxury of that war chest.
Of course.
Right, to sustain, to kind of like continue growing that IP. When times are bad, they'll just ride it through.
Yeah.
Right? What would that be? What would that advice be?
Well, I like to say that, if a picture tells 1,000 words, then, how many words does a video game tell? My God, the capacity for storytelling through games is immense. You can bring worlds to life, make people the protagonist, and allow them to go through journeys that they otherwise wouldn't be able to. And there's a sort of connection you build to stories that you interact with directly that you otherwise don't get to do through other forms of media. So I think you need to really, really dial in and focus on the storytelling. You need to build stories that are captivating. And if you were writing a book, if you were making a movie, I'd be telling you the same thing. You got to capture a core audience of people that are fans of the content that you're putting out. The team that put out Expedition 33 this year, wildly successful game, pitched the idea to Ubisoft. Some of them were former Ubisoft staff, but Ubisoft said, hey, the guys at Square Enix figured out how to do turn-based games better than us, and all of Japan's making JRPGs. Why do we want to dabble in a market that we have no business being in? I would argue that Expedition 33 is the best turn-based game that's ever been put out. That's my personal opinion, but I think that they've put out something incredible. And there's so many people that connected so well to the story that I have no doubt that any sequels they put out will be equally as successful as the first game. And being able to capture that means you have to come at it with passion. And sure, there's going to be people that get lucky. Yeah, there's going to be big spenders that pump a lot of money into buying their way into the space, but nothing can beat true passion in storytelling and putting out something that'll captivate an audience. And once you're able to do that, if you put a core team around it and you build the right gameplay loops, what you have is a recipe for success.
I think that a big part as well is consistency. And when I say consistency, I mean in community development, it is about establishing trust. Yep. And it's about showing up.
Yep.
And so when we look at new game founders and really just new founders in Web3 in general, show up today, show up tomorrow, show up consistently in your messaging, and then allow that to build trust. You build trust with investors, you build trust with your users, and then take that feedback and then remain consistent. If you have, I love and recommend a lot of founders to use season models. So to set a roadmap and take not only the user, but your team and align on this is what we're doing now. This is our vision for the future. This is what we're making together. And the better that you get at threading that needle and telling that story and providing a structure of this is where we are and this is where we're going, this is the story and this is how it develops, then you build a shared journey. You've built community, you've built trust.
And there's plenty of ways you can adopt Web3 tech into game development narrative that hasn't really been truly explored, where your sort of standard choose your own adventure novel could take a completely different turn when you're pulling a lot of audience members' reactions into how certain plot points play out. The staggered release of live service games fits really well into this model, and I think that a studio that really uses their core audience as a method to shape storytelling moving forward can have a lot of success. There's far more ways people are looking at how to monetize through Web3 as opposed to how to storytell through Web3, and that's something that I think will be very interesting to see shift.
I just want to throw AI into that as well.
Tell me.
Right, because with the rise of AI, I think the doors blew open, right? In terms of like what you're talking about when it comes to storytelling. I can actually see what you're saying, right? Like different branches of how the story plays out. back in the day, you probably would have, back in the CD days, you probably have 10 CDs, right?
Right.
You kind of like carry all the content that's required for the game. But these days, everything based on cloud, and with AI being in the back, I think there's so much opportunity there, and integrated with, I think the blockchain is the blockchain.
Right.
Right. Today, do all of us here need to know how a credit card works? To be honest, we don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? All you need to know is, this is my limit.
Yep.
This is how much I have spent before, and I can spend how much more. I go to the shop, I order or buy something that I want, I tap, it works, done. No one's going to talk about payment rails, settlement. Not everyone's going to talk about that, right? And in case the audience is kind of like wondering, the three of us blabbering here, does this actually relate to the topic? It does, right? Friction for adoption has always been overcomplicating something, right? And I think that's in my personal opinion, I feel that that's something that the blockchain gaming space has taken the wrong foot by prioritizing incentivization. But heck, I got into crypto because of that as well. So I'm guilty as charged.
But there's too few people that understand the technology, and there's even fewer that are interested in understanding the technology, I would argue, to make that a selling point. It really needs to be at the very back, the appendix of your investor pitch to anyone you talk to if you're looking to raise. What's got to be front and center is how you're going to pull in users using the same methods that Web2 studios have been using for decades and decades and decades. You have to do what's tried and tested. You're not reinventing the wheel here. You're still just making games. You know, and that's what people seem to forget. They think that they're building the next generation of games. Yep, they're just games. So, you know, what works, and
And we've invested in a couple of AI projects that are specifically engineered for the gaming context. And I think the important thing to keep in mind with AI is it's changing the interface of interaction. As soon as we bring in large language models that are doing natural language and you're having a conversation and an interaction, suddenly it becomes more fluid. And the question becomes is, how does this AI agent, if I go in and I'm talking to a shopkeeper in game, what is that conversation like? What dictates the flows of those conversations, and how is that transaction occurring? I think in a future where AI is integrated into gaming, we'll see intents-based infrastructure that operate the same thing now in DeFi. I want to do X, Y, and Z. I don't necessarily need to go into a specific protocol. I can go to an AI agent that says, okay, we're going to submit this swap. So when we abstract away the complexity of Web3, and I just go into the shopkeeper is a large language model that then executes transactions on chain for me. I didn't have to sit and sign and do a bunch of work. Everything flows together. And I think that there's going to be this seamless kind of interaction that we're not there yet. We're not at the point where things are just flowing and it's painless, but it's right around the corner. And I think that that's going to be one of the big catalysts towards 1 billion people coming on chain through Web3.
I think the user demand is, people are just hungry, right? Because I think these days, game creation is taking a long time.
Right.
Despite the fact that we have got AI and whatnot. But I think to create something of great quality, you still need those man hours to go in, right? And that's why I think a lot of the users are genuinely like hungry for something new, right? We saw the launch of Genshin Impact during the COVID day.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Right? Who would have thought it would have become that huge bang in the space?
It's unbelievable. Yeah, they did, what was it, 650 million in the first month?
Yeah, I still remember seeing the photos because back then I was still in my esports gig, and I saw the photos of their annual dinner. They were giving away at that point in time 3080 Ti was the top range graphic card, and it was during COVID that prices shot up, right, because of mining. They gave away more than 100 3080 Ti's for their annual dinner.
Wow.
That's how much they made.
I should have been going to those events, Dylan.
And FYI, they were not doing well. Yeah. With Honkai Impact and everything. They were not doing well. And as far as I know, it was a Hail Mary Genshin Impact was not ready for launch, and they just went.
Yeah, it sort of felt that way. And, the way that they time-gated content, MiHoYo as a business has really capitalized on, we were talking about this earlier, consumer psychology and getting people to want more. And they build really good games. They truly do. I mean, I've played Genshin. I've played a few of the other games, Endless End Zero, I've tried out as well. They build really great content, and they entice users to come in. And this is something that EA did pretty well as well, with Call of Duty and with the other games. I know that seeing more developers follow that route, might not be the best for consumers, because then you're building content that's meant to be infinitely monetizable long term. But it does sort of paint a picture of how Web3 could also break into the scene by still focusing on what MiHoYo did really well, which is focus on building the core of what is game development, doing that right, and then focusing on monetization second.
Well, there's a lot of complexity in shipping a good game. It's not something that you have maybe a founder that comes and they have a strong storytelling background. They're artists. They know the development. They've written comic book series, and the IP is really good. But building something that has a functioning in-game economy and building the mechanics of the game, the physics of the game, and making that really good, there have been some titans in the industry that have got that model down pretty well. But for somebody that's new to it, that's stepping in and wanting to transform and introduce an IP, I think that it's sometimes underestimated how challenging it is to give a good full stack game experience. And so I think for new founders in particular, it's giving a feedback loop and a game loop that works. That's going to be one of the first ones, I think, in Web3, which, funny enough, you have a beta, and the beta comes out, and it's incredibly buggy, and it's incredibly laggy. And there's not, the user experience basis isn't there to sustain a token in the first place. So I think that we shouldn't even talk about incentivization and talk about financialization until we talk about shipping good games.
So game first, always.
Yeah, that's something where Dylan and I fundamentally agree. It's got to be content forward. It's got to be game forward. And then once you got that figured out, then you can try and figure out the rest. Or maybe you could do them in tandem, but just definitely not the other first. Don't focus on monetization.
You realize that it's been overpreached, right?
Yeah.
In the past 2 years, the number of conferences that we've attended, every gaming conference, panels like this have been going on, and it has always been said, right? Game first, forget the rest, right? So the last topic I kind of want to touch on is actually infrastructure, but I want to bring this up first. Maybe very unpopular. Should there even be a label called Web3 gaming?
I think now that we've gone down this route, and we've sort of opened those doors up already, and you can't really close them. We're going to distinguish games now based on where they exist. I think in the future, obviously not. I don't think people look at God of War and say that's a console game, right? Now you see more and more games branch over from one platform to the next, and with Game Pass and with Xbox now opening up their gateways and their channels to Steam in their next console that they're putting out. I think we're seeing barriers break down. For the time being, the way that the industry sort of talked about it up until now, I think we're still going to be looking at games this way. I think as soon as the mass adoption happens, and it will, and it'll happen through titles that are, intrinsically Web3, they're just not going to be marketing it as such. That's when those barriers break down.
On that side, I mean, when I go into social media, I don't go into https / social media.
No.
Yeah, colon, yeah, right. So I'm forgetting my infrastructure piece. But no, you'd say this is social media. And so I think the Web3 element of it, again, it goes back into we have a branding crisis to a degree. And I think it's because it is a frontier technology that we're trying to find that niche and find that audience and find the what is going to be the attraction and the magnet. And for some people that are Web3 natives, that are crypto natives, they look at gaming and recognize that the market is larger than television, film, and music combined. And they know that opportunity is there, but nobody's sure how exactly to unlock it. So we have this, multi-billion-dollar industry that has just a treasure trove of value to not only create for gamers. I believe that there is value to be created for gamers, but also value to be created for the Web3 industry, towards crypto adoption, towards Web3 adoption, towards AI adoption. Gaming is a consumer funnel that people are trying to find the recipe to unlock.
I'm a firm believer of common languages. So gaming to me, the only reason why I've always been bullish on gaming specifically is because I do believe that adoption is so much easier for gamers, simply because we are just so used to, I think we touched on this outside the panel, we understand UI, we understand UX, right? We have demands for it, in fact, right? And the question is, like, the infrastructure these days, does it necessarily support those to deliver that impact to get users to kind of even want to touch base with the game, right?
This is a good one. I mean, one of the things we do best in Abu Dhabi is we pull in all stakeholders when it comes to decision making on any policy, regulation, legislation that might impact industry. So, I mean, my boss and I at the time sat on the Blockchain and Digital Assets Committee that Abu Dhabi had put together specifically to make sure that when regulations and when legislations come out, different stakeholders are at the table helping shape it so that we don't pass rules to impact finance that also impact game development, right? So when questions get asked about what's the difference between this digital asset and that one, and I'd be like, well, this one you earn in MapleStory by killing Zakub, and that one you buy because you think it's an investment. So just being able to make that distinction and understand that there is a distinction there is, I think, really important, and it's important for governments to understand that. We've worked hard in Abu Dhabi to make sure that when we do put rules in place, we make them welcoming to business that want to operate with the right rules and right mindsets in place. And I think that's a big part of what helped us attract some really large stakeholders, similar to Nexon, like Dylan here from Beam, to come and want to be a part of the playground that we're putting together.
So wait, before you go, Dylan, so like how you kind of brought up the regulatory and the legislation piece, right? And one thing that I mentioned earlier outside of panel was that the minute we touch blockchain, we're always going global, right? And I think regulatory clarity for the gaming industry as a whole has always been murky as well, right? Because you have some countries saying that, opening a blind box is illegal, right? This has been going back and forth, right? And
what do you think about that? What do you think about loot boxes in general?
Loot boxes,
because they've left gaming now. I mean, you can go and buy the Pop Mart ones. Yeah, so it's not
the
just
Boo Boo box
now. Yeah, exactly.
Just,
who here has opened the Labubu box? Anyone?
Anyone fan of Labubu?
No.
Labubu.
Oh man,
no
not many
Labubu
gamers
fans here.
Not many gamers here, and not many Labubu fans here.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Can we speculate on Labubus as well?
Oh, actually
you
you
buy a
can.
Labubu index or something?
Actually, you can. You can. I think they just opened a huge Pop Mart in the States, and it's blowing up right now.
Yeah.
I think another one was just last week in Thailand. It's also blowing up.
Yeah.
I think they go to IPO soon.
When people buy Labubus for hundreds of dollars, right? Like you open a mystery box and then suddenly you have this asset. And I mean, you have people that buy them at scale. Some people love Labubu, and then some people want to go on to Grailed or go on to whatever secondary site and sell them as well, right? I think that anything that builds cultural relevance is going to build an aftermarket. It's just how formalized is that market? When we look at gaming markets now and digital assets in gaming, you have a lot of gray markets of individuals that farm and then go and sell those digital assets in that space. Now, when we talk about Web3 and the formalization and the regulatory compliance of Web3, Abu Dhabi has been regulating digital assets through the Abu Dhabi Global Market since 2018. So very progressive, very forward-looking in that movement of things. But I think now we're looking at the United States and the Genius Act, and we're starting to look at a unified global picture that points to decentralized products actually gaining the foundation that it's a formalized acceptance. And that formal acceptance, I think, just opens the whole consumer layer, a whole consumer funnel that's going to impact gaming. It's going to impact decentralized finance. It's going to impact every layer of the stack of what we do online. Is just going to move over to Web3 rails, and hopefully the end user isn't even aware of it.
Okay. So Thanks, Dylan. You kind of like gave me a little bit of time to answer Sultan as well. Loot boxes. I'm indifferent. I feel that it's a very crucial part of gaming, right? The whole experience, right? Going back to the Genshin Impact kind of like experience that I had, right? Being able to pull a character that I want, going through the whole animation. I think it's part of an experience of gaming, and it's not necessarily gambling as per what some states or some countries depict it to be, right? The element...
It's not gambling because in traditional Web2 versions of loot boxes, there's no intrinsic value. You're doing it because you want something that you know you can't really sell in a standard market. You have to go through some black markets or gray markets to do so. But in Web3, it's a cornerstone of it, right? You're telling people, look, I mean, you open this loot box, maybe you get an NFT worth 10, 20, 1,000 times what your initial buy-in was. So that's why I ask, because I think it's going to be a careful line that needs to sort of be crossed, which in different regions obviously will react differently. We've seen Europe's not been very open to loot boxes in general. So, but yeah, sorry, please, I interrupted you.
No. But I think you brought on a very good dimension to it, the whole thing as well, right? In Web3, we are empowering every single user. We are democratizing ownership of digital assets, essentially, right? And you're right to say that today, if I do open a SSR champion and choose to sell it, does that necessarily change the definition of this asset? Right? Today, I have a kid who's 5-year-old and he somehow got access to my fingerprint and decided to open that loot box, right? Is that right or wrong?
If you have kids that can pull your fingerprints from coffee mugs, I mean, you have incredible kids. That's amazing.
But yeah, I think definition, regulatory clarity is still something that is something on the horizon. I think a lot of people are starting to come together. Malaysia is now the host of ASEAN.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it's just been announced that President Donald Trump might be in Malaysia in October. And not only him, President Xi from China, quite a number of presidents are going to be in Malaysia. I think the digital asset is one of the core topics this time around, because the Prime Minister of Malaysia just recently launched a digital asset innovation hub in Malaysia. We're starting to sandbox a lot of digital asset initiatives like stable coins and whatnot. So I think we're getting there.
Yeah.
Right. And how does this necessarily tie back to gaming again? It does. You're a gamer, right? For those that pulled up your hands, right? You know that there is an economy in gaming, right? And we as gamers understand economy like nobody else. Today, we spend $100 in opening a certain amount of like loot boxes, right? How much can I sell this account for? You already made that math in here, right? So this actually plays very much into Web3 gaming per se, right? Because day in, day out, you'll be calculating how much can I monetize the hours that I spend in the game, right? Because like it or not, a lot of games still focuses on incentivization, right? And now I hope we start moving forward into really putting action into making games first, right? And everything else comes as a back end, right? And that's kind of like my summary. I think it's flashing time up, right? And I hope that the panel has been insightful for all of you. And I thank my esteemed panelists. Thanks, Dylan, Sultan.